What do you think is the biggest secret that the US government is keeping from us? Story 1. The biggest secret might not be hidden weapons or alien bodies, it might be how close we are to nuclear war, and how often. The public narrative says deterrence works, that system is stable, that safeguards are layered and reliable. What we don't hear much about are the near misses, false alarms, radar glitches, misinterpreted data, human error, moments where one person decided not to escalate. Nuclear war isn't some dramatic red button movie scene. It's a chain reaction of fear, miscalculation, and compressed decision time. Leaders would have minutes, not hours, not days, minutes. And once missiles launch, there's no undo button. The uncomfortable truth is that thousands of warheads are still active, still ready, still pointed. The Cold War ended. The arsenals didn't. Maybe the real secret isn't that it's imminent. It's that the margin for error is thinner than we're comfortable admitting. And the only reason we're still here might be because so far, the right people hesitated at the right time. Deterrence sounds stable. It's actually a permanent high-stakes standoff where one bad signal could end everything. That's not paranoia. That's math. Story 2. It's actually a permanent high-stakes standoff where one bad signal could end everything. That's not paranoia. That's math. The actual number of times that we have been driven to the brink of war/destruction only to narrowly avoid it. The real number of times we've been inches from disaster. That's the one I'd want to know. We hear about the big ones years later. Cuban Missile Crisis, Cold War standoffs, declassified near misses. But what about the incidents that never made headlines? Radar glitches that looked like incoming missiles, submarines that lost communication, misread intelligence, political escalations that were one sentence away from crossing a line. Most nuclear launches wouldn't start with certainty. They'd start with confusion, incomplete data, compressed timelines. Humans make decisions under fear with minutes to spare, and history has already shown that a single officer deciding this doesn't feel right has saved the planet before. The unsettling part isn't that the government hides some of it, it's that the system is built on speed and secrecy by design. You don't get transparency in real time when the stakes are annihilated. We like to believe global stability is solid. It's probably closer to a long chain of narrow escapes, bureaucratic luck, and people choosing not to escalate. If we knew the real count, the actual tally of times we almost didn't make it, we might not sleep as comfortably. And maybe that's exactly why we don't. Story 3. That the US actually lost the Revolutionary War and has been a double-secret vassal state of the UK ever since. It's a dramatic idea, but history doesn't support it. The American Revolutionary War ended with Britain's defeat at Yorktown in 1781, followed by the Treaty of Paris in 1783. In that treaty, Britain formally recognized the United States as a free, sovereign nation. Empires don't typically sign documents acknowledging independence if they secretly still control the territory. Afterward, the US drafted the United States Constitution, created its own executive branch separate from the monarchy, set independent trade policy, expanded westward, and even fought Britain again in the War of 1812. None of that aligns with vassal status. Alliances can look like influence. Shared language, financial ties, intelligence cooperation, those can blur lines. But influence isn't sovereignty. The US and the UK are strategic allies, not a hidden empire and its disguised colony. It's an interesting conspiracy, but the paperwork, and the wars that followed, say otherwise. Story 4. Whether you vote Democrat or Republican for president, the true power never changes hands. That's the suspicion. It feels plausible because institutions outlast individuals. Administrations rotate, but agencies remain. Career officials stay. Intelligence communities persist. Corporate interests don't dissolve every 4 years. The machinery keeps running no matter who gives the speeches. But that doesn't mean power never shifts. When Donald Trump took office, trade policy changed, regulatory priorities flipped, and the Supreme Court tilted. When Joe Biden took office, climate policy, agency leadership, and federal spending priorities shifted again. Those aren't cosmetic differences. They affect markets, courts, foreign alliances, and domestic law. The deeper truth is less cinematic than shadow rulers. Power in the US is layered. The presidency changes hands. Courts shift more slowly. Bureaucracies move slower still. Corporations and lobbyists influence both sides. Voters influence them all. Unevenly, imperfectly, but measurably. It's not that nothing changes. It's that some structures are designed not to. Stability can look like permanence. Continuity can feel like a conspiracy. And when outcomes disappoint both sides, it's tempting to assume the game is fixed. But fixed systems don't produce the policy swings we've seen. They produce stillness. American politics produces turbulence. Story 5. that all the huge concern about the budget deficit and trillions of dollars of debt actually mean anything to a regular person. When the numbers get that big, they start to feel abstract. Trillions. Tens of trillions. At that scale, your brain just rounds it to infinite. It stops feeling like money and starts feeling like monopoly. It's not stacks of cash sitting in a vault somewhere. It's bonds, obligations, interest payments, accounting entries moving between institutions. That's why it can feel unreal. But it does become real in specific ways. The United States Department of the Treasury issues debt. Investors buy it. The government pays interest on it. When interest payments rise, that's money that doesn't go to roads, healthcare, defense, or tax cuts. It shifts priorities. Debt also influences interest rates, inflation pressures, and how much flexibility the government has during crises. In extreme cases, historically in other countries, too much borrowing too fast has led to currency instability. For most people, it doesn't show up as a line item labeled national debt fee. It shows up indirectly: higher borrowing costs, tighter budgets, policy trade-offs. So no, it's not a literal pile of cash disappearing, but it's not imaginary either. It's abstract. Until it isn't. Story 6. Flight 93 was shot down. That theory has circulated for years. It suggests the US government intercepted and destroyed the plane on September 11, 2001, and then covered it up. The official investigation, including the 9/11's Commission, concluded that United Airlines Flight 93 crashed after passengers attempted to retake control from the hijackers. Cockpit voice recordings captured the struggle. The plane went down in a field near Shanksville, Pennsylvania. There were military jets scrambled that morning. There was confusion. There were incomplete reports. Some officials initially gave conflicting statements about shoot-down authority. That fog of war is part of what keeps the theory alive. But investigations found no evidence of missile damage, no debris pattern consistent with an air-to-air strike, and no confirmed order carried out to shoot the plane down. Families of victims were briefed extensively on the findings. The tragedy of Flight 93 is already immense. Passengers realized what was happening and fought back, likely preventing the plane from reaching its intended target. Sometimes, the simplest explanation, chaos, hijackers, resistance, is the one supported by the evidence. The shoot-down theory remains a claim. The documented record does not support it. Story 7. I think the technology of weaponry is probably at the top. And when someone says the stuff we have would blow your mind, it's easy to fill in the blanks with something almost sci-fi. There are aircraft and defense systems the public doesn't know much about. Programs get classified, capabilities are intentionally vague. That's normal in national defense. You don't advertise your edge, but it's important to separate two things: classified and impossible. The US military openly operates aircraft that already feel futuristic, like the F-22 Raptor and B-2 Spirit, and has unveiled next-gen platforms such as the B-21 Raider. Even what's public involves stealth shaping, advanced composites, sensor fusion, autonomous systems, hypersonic research. Now imagine the projects that are still in development or partially classified. That doesn't automatically mean alien-level propulsion or physics-breaking craft. It usually means incremental but powerful advances. Better materials, longer range, lower radar signatures, smarter AI integration. If your dad works for the Federal Aviation Administration, he's surrounded by aviation at a high level. Even knowing the gap between commercial aviation and cutting-edge military aerospace could be enough to blow your mind. The truth is probably less supernatural, but still impressive. Technology moves fast, and the most advanced tools are rarely the ones on display. Story 8. That we're really in the Matrix. It's one of those ideas that won't die because it hits something deep. The Matrix didn't invent the concept. It just gave it visuals. Wires, pods, a simulated sky, but the core question is older. What if reality isn't base reality? Philosopher Nick Bostrom framed it as the simulation hypothesis. If advanced civilizations can simulate universes, and if they run many of them, statistically it might be more likely we're inside one than in the original layer. That's unsettling math. But there's a difference between possible and probable. Right now, there's no empirical evidence that we're in a simulation, no glitches that survive scrutiny, no measurable pixel grid of space-time confirmed to be artificial. Physics works consistently. The universe follows mathematical rules, but math describing reality isn't proof that reality is software. It's a metaphysical question, not a testable conspiracy. And even if we were in a simulation, your experiences would still be real to you. Pain would hurt, love would matter, consequences would count inside the system. The idea is powerful because it destabilizes certainty, but until there's evidence, it's philosophy wrapped in sci-fi. Not a revealed secret, just an unanswered question. Story 9. That the Air Force has invented a pulsed ion energy drive and is quietly putting it into fighter jets. Fly halfway around the world in minutes. Strike. Be home before radar systems fully process what happened. It sounds clean, surgical, almost effortless, but propulsion doesn't work like that. Ion drives are real. NASA has used them on spacecraft because they're incredibly efficient in space. The catch? They produce tiny amounts of thrust over very long periods, great for deep space probes. Completely impractical for atmospheric fighter jets that need massive thrust instantly to overcome gravity and drag. To cross half the globe in minutes inside the atmosphere, you'd need sustained hypersonic speeds far beyond current fighter capabilities. And you'd run into brutal heat, structural stress, fuel constraints, and plasma effects that interfere with control and communication. Even hypersonic missile programs struggle with those realities. The US Air Force openly develops advanced aircraft, like the F-22 Raptor and next-generation platforms under programs like NGAD. They push stealth, sensors, and autonomy, but rewriting propulsion physics. That's not something you hide in a hangar. If a breakthrough that dramatic existed, it wouldn't just change warfare. It would change transportation, space travel, and global economics overnight. There's no credible evidence such a drive exists. It's a compelling image, but physics still sets the limits. Story 10. That Gilligan is still on that damned island, and they've known where he was from day one, and just never bothered to help. It feels absurd, which is fitting because Gilligan's Island was absurd on purpose. The entire premise hinges on exaggerated incompetence and comic timing. A 3-hour tour turns into a multi-season marooning. The castaways build radios out of coconuts but can't patch a hole in a boat. Rescue opportunities appear and collapse for plot reasons, not logic. Within the story, no secret government tracks him. No satellite feed watches from above. It's a 1960s sitcom operating in a closed comedic universe where irony is the engine. If anyone knew where he was and refused to help, that would shift the show from slapstick to dark conspiracy thriller overnight. But the joke is simpler. Gilligan isn't trapped because of geopolitics. He's trapped because the format demands it. The island isn't a mystery, it's a stage. And the moment they get rescued, the show ends. Story 11. That the government has transferred so much wealth to so few that food additives were developed to quietly reduce the life expectancy of the poor. It's a dark theory. And it feeds on something real. Inequality exists. Wealth concentration is measurable. Corporate influence over policy is debated constantly. So when outcomes feel unfair, it's easy to imagine intent behind them. But engineering additives to selectively shorten lives would require a level of coordination, secrecy, and scientific precision that simply doesn't align with how food systems work. Food additives are reviewed by agencies like the US Food and Drug Administration. They're studied globally. Independent researchers test them. Other countries run their own evaluations. Supply chains cross borders. To intentionally lace food with something life-shortening and have it affect only the poor would mean controlling massive private industries, academic research, international oversight, whistleblowers, and epidemiological data without leaks. Public health disparities are real. They're linked to access to healthcare, education, income, environment, stress, and nutrition quality. Highly processed diets can absolutely contribute to chronic disease, but that's about economics and market incentives, not secret mortality programs. Structural inequality is complex and frustrating, but complexity doesn't automatically mean conspiracy, and extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. Right now, there isn't any. Story 12, the true state of government finances. Not the headline number, not the press conference version, the real one. Governments publish budgets. The Congressional Budget Office projects deficits. The United States Department of the Treasury reports debt totals down to the dollar. On paper, it's transparent. But paper isn't the whole picture. There are unfunded liabilities, future obligations like Social Security and Medicare. There are off-balance sheet commitments. There are optimistic growth assumptions baked into projections. There are political incentives to downplay risk or exaggerate crises depending on who's speaking. None of that means there's a secret vault with a hidden ledger. It means public finance is complicated, long-term, and shaped by incentives. Debt is real. Interest payments are real. So are assets, tax capacity, economic growth, and the unique position of the US dollar in global markets. The unsettling part isn't that there's a single hidden number. It's that sustainability depends on future growth, policy choices, demographics, and investor confidence, variables no one fully controls. The books are public. The future isn't. And that uncertainty is what makes people suspect there must be something deeper. Story 13. Technology makes representative democracy obsolete. It's an appealing idea. If we can order groceries, move money, and talk across continents instantly, why can't we vote on legislation the same way? Why rely on a few hundred lawmakers when millions could weigh in directly from their phones? Digital tools could expand participation. They could allow real-time polling on bills, transparent amendments, even public drafting platforms. In theory, that sounds more responsive and more democratic than waiting for elected officials to negotiate behind closed doors. But scale changes things. National legislation isn't just yes or no questions, it's dense policy language, trade-offs, unintended consequences, and minority protections. Direct democracy can amplify passion, but it can also amplify misinformation, short-term thinking, and majoritarian pressure. Cybersecurity risks, digital access gaps, and foreign interference add another layer of complexity. Representative systems weren't designed because people lacked imagination. They were designed to filter, deliberate, and slow things down. Technology can enhance democracy, transparency, access, engagement. Whether it can replace representation without destabilizing it is a much harder question. Story 14. We already lost our freedom. We just won't realize it for another 50 years. That's the kind of thought that sticks in your head at night. Because freedom rarely disappears in one dramatic moment, it erodes, quietly, policy by policy, convenience by convenience. Crisis by crisis, history shows that rights can narrow gradually. Surveillance expands temporarily. Emergency powers linger. Cultural pressure replaces legal force. And by the time people look back, the shift feels obvious. But it didn't feel obvious while it was happening. At the same time, every generation has believed it was living at the edge of decline. People during wartime, during the Cold War, during civil unrest, all felt that something irreversible had been lost. Yet institutions changed, adapted, and sometimes even expanded rights in response. Freedom isn't a switch that flips off. It's a balance between security, technology, law, and civic participation. The unsettling truth is this: if freedoms erode, it usually happens through public acceptance, not secret conquest. Through trade-offs people agree to, through apathy more than force. Whether we've already lost it depends less on a hidden moment in the past and more on what people are willing to defend in the present. Story 15. Aliens. 3 syllables that carry an entire universe of implication. The question isn't whether the universe is big enough for them, it is. With billions of galaxies and trillions of planets, the odds suggest life somewhere else are high. Microbial life? Statistically plausible. Intelligent technological civilizations? Possible. The silence is what unsettles people. No confirmed signals, no verified craft, no open contact, just grainy footage, declassified reports, and ambiguous sightings. Governments, including agencies within the United States Department of Defense, have acknowledged unidentified aerial phenomena. Unidentified doesn't mean extraterrestrial. It means unexplained with current data. There's also the Fermi paradox. If intelligent life is common, where is everyone? Maybe civilizations are rare. Maybe they don't last long. Maybe the distances are too vast. Maybe we're early, or maybe we're looking the wrong way. The idea persists because it reframes humanity. If we're alone, that's staggering. If we're not, that's transformative. Right now, there's no verified evidence of alien visitation, but the search continues, and the universe is very, very large. Story 16. The extent of political corruption in the world. That virtually every major political figure, especially in third world countries, has offshore bank accounts containing millions of dollars, and that corruption is simply a fact of doing business internationally. Some foreign aid programs probably amount almost entirely to bribery. Also, the extent of weapons proliferation. South Africa and other unacknowledged countries had nuclear programs, and many more may have acquired a small number of working black market weapons, even if they couldn't produce them from scratch. Story 17. That they know exactly how the boom and bust cycle works, and they manipulate it to maintain the status quo. And everything else? Just noise. It's tempting to believe that. Markets surge, markets crash, ordinary people get squeezed. Then institutions stabilize things just enough to reset the game. It can feel choreographed. There are powerful actors who influence cycles. Central banks like the Federal Reserve adjust interest rates, governments pass stimulus or tighten budgets, large financial institutions move massive pools of capital. Policy decisions absolutely affect liquidity, credit expansion, and asset prices. But influence isn't omniscience. Boom and bust dynamics emerge from millions of independent decisions. Speculation, fear, leverage, innovation, herd behavior. Even central banks regularly misjudge inflation, growth, or asset bubbles. If cycles were fully controlled, recessions wouldn't surprise policymakers as often as they do. The uncomfortable reality is messier than manipulation. Elites often protect themselves better during downturns. Structural advantages cushion them. That can look like orchestration, but complexity, incentives, and imperfect foresight usually explain more than a master switch behind a curtain. Economic news isn't a pure signal, but it's not pure theater either. It's a noisy system where power matters. and uncertainty still wins. Story 18. If you think SEAL Team 6 was badass, wait until they reveal SEAL Team 7. It sounds like the sequel they're saving for later. But here's the part that ruins the mystique a little. SEAL Team 6 Inches wasn't even the sixth team. When it was formed in 1980, there were only 2 SEAL teams. The name was reportedly chosen to confuse Soviet intelligence about how many existed. Today, the unit is officially known as the United States Naval Special Warfare Development Group, DEVGRU. Elite military units don't number themselves like movie franchises. They reorganize, they rename, they classify capabilities. Some units are public, some are less public, but there isn't a secret ladder of increasingly unstoppable teams waiting to be unveiled like a plot twist. The mystique comes from what they do, not what they're called. Special mission units exist across branches, highly trained, highly selective, often operating in classified contexts. But their power isn't supernatural. It's training, intelligence, logistics, technology, and support networks working together. SEAL Team 7 Inches makes for a great punchline. In reality, capability isn't hidden behind the next number. It's already embedded in the structure. Story 19, that our voting system is very removed from democracy. It can feel that way when you zoom out. You cast a ballot, it disappears into layers, precincts, counties, states, certification boards, courts. Presidential elections route through the Electoral College instead of a simple national popular vote. Congressional districts are drawn strategically. Senate representation isn't proportional. By the time a law is passed, it's filtered through committees, leadership, lobbying, amendments, and negotiations most voters never see. Democracy in its purest form suggests direct will. Majority decides, policy follows. But the modern system is layered with buffers. Representation instead of direct vote. Federalism instead of centralization. Procedural hurdles instead of instant change. Add campaign finance realities, media framing, party primaries with low turnout, and procedural rules like filibusters, and the distance between public sentiment and legislative outcome can feel enormous. The structure slows things down. It redistributes influence. It protects minority interests, but also entrenches power centers. So the experience for many people isn't, I voted and policy changed. It's, I voted and the machine kept moving. That gap between participation and perceived impact is where the feeling of democratic distance grows. Story 20. I'm in the camp that believes there are real cures for some incurable diseases. But there's no money in the cure. That's the suspicion. Chronic illness is a trillion-dollar ecosystem. Long-term treatments. Lifelong management plans. Entire industries built around maintenance, not elimination. When you look at it that way, a permanent cure almost feels economically disruptive. Pharmaceutical companies are publicly traded. They answer to shareholders. Revenue predictability matters. A drug you take for life is more stable than a one-time fix. That dynamic alone fuels doubt. Add in high drug prices, patent extensions, opaque pricing structures, lobbying power, and regulatory capture concerns, and the system can start to look less like pure healthcare and more like managed demand. It's not hard to imagine breakthroughs being slowed, buried, or redirected if they threaten existing revenue streams. The uncomfortable part isn't just, is there a cure? It's whether incentives align with eliminating disease or sustaining treatment markets. When health becomes an industry, people start wondering whether healing is the priority or product longevity. And once that doubt takes root, every incurable diagnosis feels less final and more suspicious. Story 21. Easy. Classified space programs where we have unleashed blue goo would be the biggest conceivable, clearly. It involves making nanotechnology robots which replicate by eating mass and then creating copies of themselves. We launch it into space at another celestial body, it turns into 100% copies of the robots. They all launch in different directions. They spread through the universe exponentially, thus the biggest conceivable classified project/conspiracy. We are just claiming the space program is not worthwhile and shutting down NASA to keep other countries like China from trying to do the same thing and compete with us for market share of all the mass in the universe, including all the other sentient species, which our blue goo will surround and imprison. It's the only way to be sure. Story 22. The sheer amount of information every government agency is tracking. Not just the obvious stuff, everything. Every click, every financial transaction, travel patterns, metadata from calls and texts, license plate scans, biometric databases, social media activity, purchase histories, geolocation trails that map your life down to the minute. Most people imagine surveillance as targeted, focused on suspects. But modern data systems don't need suspicion first. They collect broadly. Agencies like the National Security Agency, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and the Department of Homeland Security operate in an era where storage is cheap, and analytics are powerful. The question isn't whether data can be gathered, it's how much is being retained, cross-referenced, flagged, profiled, and most of it doesn't feel dramatic. It feels invisible. Because the shift didn't happen overnight, it expanded quietly. After crises, through legislation, through technology partnerships, through the normalization of for your safety, the unsettling thought isn't that someone is watching you right now, it's that the infrastructure exists to reconstruct your life later, if they ever choose to. Story 23. That oil companies already have a replacement for crude oil, but they won't release it because there's too much money left in the ground. It's a powerful idea. Energy is the backbone of everything. Transportation, plastics, agriculture, military logistics, global trade. If a cleaner, cheaper, scalable replacement already existed, it wouldn't just disrupt oil companies. It would rewrite geopolitics overnight, and that's exactly why people suspect it's being held back. Major oil firms operate on long investment timelines. Trillions are tied up in reserves, infrastructure, refineries, pipelines. Shareholders expect returns, governments collect taxes and royalties. Entire economies depend on the flow. So the thought emerges, if a breakthrough threatens all of that, wouldn't the incentive be to slow it down? Add to that the fact that large energy companies have historically collaborated through trade groups and industry alliances. They compete, but they also align on regulation, pricing influence, and market stability. From the outside, it can look less like rivalry and more like coordination. The suspicion isn't just about a secret fuel, it's about incentives. When wealth, power, and national security all hinge on the same resource, people start to wonder whether innovation is paced not by science, but by profit. Story 24. Not the greatest, but the assassination of John F. Kennedy. 60 years later, it still doesn't sit cleanly in people's minds. Officially, the Warren Commission concluded that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone. Case closed. Lone gunman. End of story. But the details refuse to fade, the timing, the trajectory debates, the intelligence connections, the classified files that stayed sealed for decades. When documents are withheld, even for procedural reasons, it creates oxygen for suspicion. When agencies contradict themselves in the early hours of a crisis, it leaves fractures that never fully heal. The assassination didn't just kill a president, it shattered public trust. And once trust fractures, every inconsistency feels intentional. Was it incompetence? Was it secrecy? Was it something deeper? For many people, the lingering secrecy, the redactions, the delayed releases, feels less like closure and more like confirmation that the full picture hasn't been shown. Maybe the biggest secret isn't a hidden shooter. Maybe it's everything surrounding the event that still doesn't feel fully illuminated. Story 25. That some humans have had superpowers. Either natural or the result of nuclear experiments. It's the kind of idea that lives right at the edge of possibility. On one side, you have real extremes of human biology. There are documented cases of people with extraordinary memory, unusual pain tolerance, rare genetic mutations that increase bone density, muscle mass, or resistance to disease. The human genome isn't uniform. It varies, sometimes dramatically. On the other side, you have the Cold War, radiation experiments, classified research, and governments pushing scientific boundaries in ways that later became controversial. Once people learned that governments conducted secret tests in the past, it's not a huge leap to imagine they went further than they admitted. Radiation can mutate DNA, mutations can alter biology, so the imagination fills in the gap. But mutation doesn't equal controlled enhancement. Radiation is far more likely to cause cancer and cellular damage than superhuman ability. Biology isn't a comic book upgrade system, it's fragile. The real power of this theory isn't physics, it's distrustful. If extreme talent exists and secret experimentation existed, then maybe, just maybe, someone somewhere became something more. Not a superhero, but different enough to make you wonder. Story 26. What do you think is the biggest secret that the US government is keeping from us? Genetic splicing, human-animal hybrids, and whether anyone ever pushed that line further than they admitted. Science itself isn't fiction. Researchers already insert human cells into animal embryos for medical research, studying organ growth, disease modeling, transplant compatibility. Labs use tools like CRISPR to edit genes with precision that would have sounded impossible decades ago. The boundary between species at the cellular level isn't as rigid as people once thought. That's the part that unsettles people. If gene editing works, if chimeric embryos can be created for research, if governments have funded controversial experiments before, then what's happening behind classified doors? Ethical restrictions exist. Oversight boards exist. Funding rules exist. But history shows that when scientific capability expands, someone somewhere tests the edges. The public usually hears about it later, sometimes years later. The suspicion doesn't require a full human-animal creature walking around. It just requires the belief that experiments went further than officially disclosed. Genetic power is real. The question that lingers isn't whether science exists. It's how far anyone was willing to take it, and whether we'd ever be told if they did. Ray 27. What do you think is the biggest secret that the US government is keeping from us? That the government isn't really controlled by voters. It's controlled by corporations and people with massive amounts of money. From the outside, the pattern feels consistent. Campaigns cost enormous sums. Candidates rely on donors, PACs, and fundraising networks long before election day. Lobbyists draft language, shape amendments, and maintain constant access to lawmakers. Regulatory agencies often recruit from the very industries they oversee, and officials frequently return to those industries afterward. Money doesn't just fund campaigns. It funds influence. Corporations and trade groups spend billions shaping legislation, regulatory frameworks, and tax structures. Access isn't evenly distributed. A major industry coalition can sit in a room where policy is written. An ordinary voter can cast a ballot every few years. That imbalance creates the perception, and for many, the conviction, that elections adjust the tone, but not the power structure. Policies change at the margins. Rhetoric changes dramatically, but the underlying economic architecture often remains intact. The unsettling thought isn't that votes don't count at all, it's that they operate inside boundaries already shaped by concentrated wealth. And most people only notice those boundaries when they try to push past them. Ori 28. Biological weapons research. Not the Cold War stuff we already know about, the current state of it. Officially, the US ended its offensive biological weapons program in 1969 and is a signatory to the Biological Weapons Convention. Publicly, research today is framed as defensive, studying pathogens to develop countermeasures, vaccines, detection systems. But here's where suspicion grows. To defend against a biological threat, you have to understand it deeply. That means studying how pathogens spread, mutate, and interact with human biology. It means running high containment labs. It means experimenting at the edge of what's dangerous. And from the outside, the line between defensive research and offensive capability can look thin. High security labs, classified budgets, restricted access, international tensions. Once people realize the technology exists to modify viruses and bacteria, the imagination fills in the rest. The fear isn't just that research exists, it's that capability exists. And in a world where biotechnology advances rapidly, people wonder how much is being developed quietly, not necessarily for use, but because knowledge itself is power. The question lingers in the background. If biological tools can be engineered, who decides how far that engineering goes? Ori 29, that it's not nearly as all-powerful as people think. We imagine this massive, coordinated machine, omniscient, strategic, always 10 steps ahead, pulling levers behind the curtain with precision timing. But what if the secret is the opposite? What if it's fragmented, slow, bureaucratic, full of agencies that don't communicate well, departments competing for budgets, officials reacting to events instead of orchestrating them, policies built through compromise, not master plans? From the outside, scale looks like control. In reality, scale often means complexity. Millions of employees, layers of approvals, legal constraints, political pressure, media cycles, elections, courts, international actors, markets, public opinion. None of that behaves like a single steering wheel. It's easier, psychologically, to believe someone is fully in control. That chaos is curated. Those outcomes are engineered because randomness and institutional limitation are more unsettling than conspiracy. The idea that everything is managed feels oppressive. The idea that no one is fully managing it feels unstable. Maybe the biggest hidden truth isn't omnipotence. It's a limitation. Story 30. Neutrinos from a massive solar flare are heating the Earth from the inside out. It sounds like the kind of threat no one would see coming. Invisible particles, solar violence, a quiet rise in core temperature that no surface sensor could easily trace. Neutrinos are real. The sun constantly emits them during nuclear fusion. When solar activity spikes, flares, coronal mass ejections, radiation and charged particles surge toward Earth. But here's the part that matters. Neutrinos barely interact with matter. Trillions pass through your body every second without leaving a trace. They move through the entire planet almost as if it isn't there. Detecting them requires enormous underground facilities like Super Kamiokande, precisely because they interact so rarely. For neutrinos to significantly heat Earth's core, their interaction rate would have to increase by orders of magnitude beyond known physics. That would be measurable immediately in particle detectors worldwide. Solar flares can disrupt satellites and power grids. They don't secretly cook the planet from the inside. The idea is dramatic, but the particles in question are almost ghost-like, and ghosts don't carry heat the way you'd need them to.